In an age defined by technological advancement, the landscape of childhood has undergone a radical transformation. Today's children and teens are often dubbed the anxious generation, grappling with unprecedented levels of stress, anxiety, and mental health challenges. As social psychologist Jonathan Haidt meticulously outlines in this audiobook, we stand at a crossroads where the pressures of modern life collide with the innate needs of youth. Gone are the days of carefree play, unstructured exploration, and face-to-face friendships. Instead, a phone-based childhood has emerged, one that intertwines young lives with the pervasive influence of social media and constant connectivity. As we delve into this narrative, we'll uncover how this digital shift has rewired not only how children interact with each other but also how they perceive themselves and their place in the world. This audiobook is not merely a lament for a bygone era, it is a call to action. Throughout these chapters, we will explore the myriad ways that technology has reshaped childhood, from the decline of play-based learning to the rise of social comparison and perfectionism. More importantly, we will identify the collective action problems that keep us stuck in this cycle of anxiety and propose actionable solutions for parents, educators, communities, and policymakers. As we embark on this journey, we invite you to reflect on the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. The stakes are high, but together we can reclaim childhood, ensuring that future generations grow up with the resilience, creativity, and social skills necessary to thrive in an increasingly complex world. Join us as we navigate the intricacies of modern childhood and work towards a brighter, healthier future for our children. Chapter 1: The Rise of a Troubled Generation. The mental health crisis among today's youth didn't appear out of nowhere. It built up slowly, like a silent storm gathering strength over decades. Now, we find ourselves in the eye of this storm, facing a generation of teenagers and young adults grappling with mental illness at rates never seen before. Anxiety, depression, self-harm, and suicidal thoughts have spiked dramatically across the globe. But how did we get here? What changed in such a short span of time? A global epidemic. In the US, for example, rates of teenage depression nearly doubled between 2011 and 2020. Anxiety disorders are now the most common mental health problem among teens, affecting nearly 1 in 3 adolescents. But it's not just an American problem. Similar trends have been observed in the UK, Australia, and many other countries. This is a global phenomenon, hitting countries with diverse cultures and economies at almost the same time. To make sense of this crisis, we need to take a step back and examine how childhood itself has changed. It's not just that teens are more stressed than before, it's that the entire nature of growing up has shifted in ways we're only beginning to understand. The warning signs. Imagine a 15-year-old in 1995. This teenager spends most of their time outside, riding bikes, hanging out with friends at the local park, or just wandering around the neighborhood. Weekends are filled with soccer games, spontaneous sleepovers, and the occasional movie night. Sure, they might have the latest game console or a computer, but it's not the center of their world. They've got a curfew, but within those boundaries, their world is largely unsupervised, filled with adventure and freedom. Now, flash forward to 2023. A 15-year-old's day looks very different. They're glued to their smartphone, constantly checking social media for updates. Their interactions with friends happen mostly through screens. Weekends are spent scrolling through TikTok or gaming online. They aren't allowed to roam the neighborhood as freely, and most of their play is structured, like organized sports, if they participate at all. Unstructured time is often replaced by after-school activities or more screen time. This is not just a change in how teens spend their free time. This is a change in how they experience childhood itself. The anxiety surge. The numbers don't lie, something is terribly wrong. Between 2011 and 2020, emergency room visits for self-harm and suicide among teenagers surged. One study found that the number of 12 to 17-year-olds diagnosed with major depressive episodes skyrocketed by 63% over the last decade. And while mental health has always been a concern, these rates are historically high. Take Emma, a high school sophomore, as an example. She used to enjoy school, but now, her mornings are filled with dread. Her anxiety spikes every time she opens Instagram, where it feels like everyone else's life is perfect. Emma spends hours curating her own posts, agonizing over filters, likes, and comments. Despite having over 500 friends online, she feels deeply lonely. Each day, she withdraws a little more, skipping lunch with friends, to scroll through her phone in the bathroom. Her grades start to slip, but what worries her parents more is how she's become a shadow of the happy, carefree girl she once was. Emma's experience isn't unique. The need for social validation, driven by the constant pressure of online platforms, has led many teens down a dark path of perfectionism, comparison, and loneliness. A puzzling timeline. What's striking about this crisis is the speed at which it unfolded. If we compare studies from the early 2000s to today, we notice a sharp increase in mental health issues, beginning in the early 2010s. This timing coincides almost exactly with the widespread adoption of smartphones and the rise of social media platforms. Before that, childhood, though evolving, was still largely rooted in real-world interactions, face-to-face friendships, and outdoor play. But by 2012, something fundamental had changed. The number of teens with smartphones soared, and with it came new forms of social pressure. Social media wasn't just a way to connect, it became a way to perform. Platforms like Instagram, Facebook, and Snapchat weren't just tools, they became the stage on which teens' lives were played out for the world to see, judge, and comment on. The introduction of these platforms, combined with the rise of smartphone use, marked the beginning of what some call the Great Experiment, an experiment in rewiring the teenage brain. Except there was no control group, no safety net, and no real understanding of the long-term effects. More than just phones. However, it's too simplistic to say that smartphones and social media are the only causes. There were other warning signs and gradual shifts that paved the way for this mental health crisis. For instance, starting in the 1980s, there was a growing emphasis on safety and risk aversion. Well-meaning parents, schools, and communities began to restrict the freedom that children once had to explore on their own. This phenomenon was often referred to as the helicopter parent culture, where children's lives became highly monitored and structured. Gone were the days of unsupervised play, now every activity had a coach, a schedule, and a goal. Children no longer learned to resolve conflicts with peers, because an adult was always nearby to intervene. They didn't develop the resilience that comes from facing challenges on their own. Instead, they were sheltered from risk, both physical and emotional. Take the story of Michael, a 12-year-old who wanted to ride his bike to his friend's house, just 2 blocks away. His mom said no, citing concerns about his safety. So, Michael stayed inside, scrolling through YouTube videos and playing video games. What Michael missed out on was more than just physical activity. He lost an opportunity to explore his environment, make decisions, and gain a sense of independence. What we see, then, is that even before the rise of smartphones, childhood was beginning to change in subtle ways. The freedom and independence that once characterized growing up were being replaced by structured activities, safety concerns, and adult supervision. The perfect storm. By the time smartphones arrived in the early 2010s, the groundwork had been laid. Kids were already living more structured, controlled lives, with less freedom to roam and play. Now, their free time was filled with screens. Social media amplified insecurities, video games offered escapes, and the digital world began to take precedence over the real one. The combination of these forces, overprotective parenting, structured lives, and constant digital engagement, created the perfect storm. Teens, once resilient and independent, became more anxious, more isolated, and more vulnerable to mental health challenges. Engaging with the bigger picture. As we dive deeper into this audiobook, we'll explore how these changes in childhood have affected everything from social development to neurological growth. We'll look at the mechanisms that fuel this crisis, and how the digital world has rewired young brains in ways we couldn't have predicted. And most importantly, we'll uncover the steps that can be taken to reclaim a healthier, more balanced childhood. But for now, as we wrap up this first chapter, let's take a moment to reflect on the childhoods we knew and the ones we see unfolding today. What have we gained, and what have we lost? This chapter isn't just about statistics and timelines, it's about understanding the lived experience of teens like Emma and Michael, whose realities have been shaped by forces beyond their control. These stories will guide us through the complexities of modern childhood, reminding us that behind every data point is a real person struggling to navigate this new, anxious generation. The final blow, the smartphone revolution. While fear-based parenting and overscheduling chipped away at play, the final blow came with the rise of smartphones and social media in the early 2010s. Suddenly, children and teens had access to a vast digital world that competed for their attention at every moment. Social media platforms, games, and apps became the primary form of entertainment, replacing outdoor play and face-to-face interactions. Take 14-year-old Mia. She spends most of her free time on Instagram and Snapchat, constantly refreshing her feed to see what her friends are posting. She rarely goes outside to play anymore, and even when she hangs out with friends in person, they often spend more time staring at their phones than talking to each other. Mia's world has shifted from the physical to the digital, and with it, her sense of play has changed, too. Instead of playing games with her friends in real life, she's focused on creating the perfect online image. This shift to a phone-based childhood has had profound consequences. Social media encourages constant comparison and competition, making kids feel like they're never good enough. And the more time they spend on their phones, the less time they have for real-world experiences that help them grow and develop. The consequences of a playless childhood. The decline of play has had serious consequences for children's mental health and development. Without the freedom to explore, take risks, and solve problems on their own, kids are missing out on crucial opportunities to build resilience. They're more anxious, more dependent on adults, and less able to cope with the challenges of life. Studies have shown that children who don't engage in enough free play are more likely to struggle with anxiety and depression. They're also less likely to develop important social skills, like negotiation and conflict resolution, because they haven't had the chance to practice these skills in an unstructured environment. In fact, research suggests that the decline in free play is directly linked to the rise in teen mental health issues. Children who don't get enough playtime are more likely to feel stressed, overwhelmed, and isolated. And when play is replaced by screen time, the effects are even more pronounced. The importance of play in development. To understand why play is so important, we need to look at what happens in the brain during play. When children engage in free, imaginative play, they're not just having fun, they're building neural pathways that help them regulate emotions, solve problems, and develop creativity. Play allows children to experiment with different roles, test out new ideas, and learn from their mistakes. Think about a group of kids playing a game of make-believe in the backyard. One child might take on the role of a pirate captain, while another pretends to be a lost explorer. Through their play, they're learning how to collaborate, negotiate rules, and work through conflicts. They're also developing empathy by imagining what it's like to be someone else. All of this happens naturally during play, without adult interference. When play is replaced by screens or structured activities, children lose these opportunities for growth. They become more passive, consuming content instead of creating their own experiences. And as a result, their ability to navigate the real world is diminished. Reclaiming play. The good news is that it's not too late to reclaim play. Parents, educators, and communities can take steps to bring back the kind of free, unstructured play that children need to thrive. By giving kids more freedom to explore and take risks, we can help them develop the skills they need to navigate the complexities of life. As we'll see in later chapters, the path to reclaiming play won't be easy, but it's crucial if we want to raise a generation of resilient, confident, and emotionally healthy children. Play is not a luxury, it's a necessity. And without it, we risk losing something essential in the fabric of childhood itself. Closing thoughts. In this chapter, we've explored how the decline of play has contributed to the mental health crisis among today's youth. From the rise of helicopter parenting to the overscheduled childhood, we've seen how well-intentioned efforts to keep children safe and successful have had unintended consequences. And with the rise of smartphones and social media, the problem has only gotten worse. But there is hope. By understanding the importance of play and making room for it in children's lives, we can begin to reverse the damage. The next chapters will explore more ways to address the crisis and reclaim a healthier, more balanced childhood for future generations. Remember, childhood is meant to be a time of exploration, creativity, and play. Let's make sure we don't lose sight of that. Chapter 2: The Decline of Play and the Rise of the Phone-Based Childhood. In the last chapter, we explored the dramatic rise in teen mental illness and the pivotal role that smartphones and social media have played. But that's only part of the story. To fully understand this crisis, we need to take a closer look at how childhood itself has been transformed over the past few decades. Central to this transformation is one vital element: play. For much of human history, play was a defining feature of childhood. It was how kids learned to navigate the world, take risks, resolve conflicts, and develop resilience. Play was more than just fun, it was crucial for healthy development. However, starting in the 1980s, play began to decline, and by the 2010s, it was replaced by a new dominant activity: time spent on screens, especially on phones. This shift from a play-based childhood to a phone-based childhood has had profound effects on children's physical, social, and emotional development. What happened to play? Imagine a typical afternoon in the 1970s. School is out, and kids flood the streets. They're riding bikes, climbing trees, playing tag, or organizing impromptu soccer matches in the neighborhood park. There are no parents hovering nearby. The kids make their own rules, solve their own disputes, and figure out how to make things fair. In short, they're learning crucial life skills while having fun. Now, flash forward to today. Instead of playing outside, most kids are indoors, absorbed in their screens. If they are involved in sports or other activities, these are typically organized and supervised by adults. The spontaneous, unsupervised play that once defined childhood has all but vanished. But why did this happen? What led to the decline of play? The fear factor. One major reason is the rise of what sociologists call safetyism. Starting in the 1980s, there was a growing fear among parents that the world was becoming more dangerous for children. Stories of child abductions and other crimes were sensationalized in the media, even though the actual risk to children was extremely low. These fears led to a cultural shift where parents felt it was no longer safe to let their kids roam freely. Take the case of James, a 10-year-old boy living in a quiet suburban neighborhood in 1995. James used to play with his friends after school, riding his bike to the nearby park. But one day, his mother heard about a child abduction on the news, and even though it happened hundreds of miles away, she decided it was no longer safe for James to play unsupervised. From that point on, James's outdoor play was restricted to organized activities, like soccer practice, where an adult was always present. This kind of fear-based parenting became increasingly common, and soon, free play was replaced with structured, adult-supervised activities. Parents didn't realize it at the time, but by limiting their children's freedom, they were also limiting their ability to develop independence, resilience, and problem-solving skills. The birth of helicopter parenting. Around the same time, a new parenting style emerged, often referred to as helicopter parenting. Parents became more involved in every aspect of their children's lives, hovering over them to ensure they were safe, successful, and shielded from harm. While these parents were well-intentioned, this style of parenting had some unintended consequences. Children who were constantly monitored and guided by adults lost the opportunity to figure things out for themselves. They didn't learn how to cope with failure or handle conflicts without adult intervention. They became more dependent on their parents and less confident in their own abilities. Take Olivia, for example. In elementary school, Olivia's parents signed her up for every possible extracurricular activity: ballet, piano, swimming, and art classes. While she enjoyed these activities, they were always organized and led by adults. Olivia didn't have much time for unstructured play, and when she did, her parents were always nearby to guide her if anything went wrong. As a result, Olivia struggled to make decisions on her own and became anxious when faced with challenges she had to solve independently. The overscheduled childhood. Another factor that contributed to the decline of play was the increasing pressure on children to succeed academically and in extracurricular activities. Starting in the 1990s, there was a growing belief that children needed to be constantly busy to stay competitive. Parents, worried about their kids' future success, began to fill their schedules with activities that would look good on college applications. This shift created what some psychologists call the overscheduled childhood. Kids went from school to piano lessons, soccer practice, and then to a tutoring session, all without a moment to breathe or just play. Playtime became something that had to be scheduled, not something that happened naturally. Think about Daniel, a 13-year-old with a packed after-school schedule. After school, he goes straight to a 2-hour basketball practice, followed by math tutoring, and then homework. By the time he finishes his day, it's 9 p.m., and he's exhausted. He enjoys basketball, but there's no time for the kind of free, imaginative play he used to love when he was younger. Daniel's life is structured, efficient, and busy, but it's also missing the spontaneity and joy of unstructured time. Chapter 3: The Great Rewiring of Childhood, How Technology Reshaped Kids' Minds. In the previous chapter, we explored the decline of play and how it impacted children's ability to develop resilience, independence, and essential social skills. But that was only one part of the equation. In this chapter, we'll delve into an even more profound change: how technology, particularly smartphones and social media, has fundamentally rewired the way children's brains develop and function. The digital revolution of the 21st century brought with it enormous benefits: access to information, easier communication, and endless entertainment. However, it also introduced new challenges, especially for children and teenagers who are growing up with screens in their hands. By the 2010s, smartphones became ubiquitous, and the phone-based childhood was fully established. This chapter will explore how this seismic shift altered the developmental landscape for kids, focusing on its effects on sleep, attention, social interaction, self-esteem, and mental health. The sleep deprivation crisis. Let's start with one of the most immediate and measurable consequences of the phone-based childhood: sleep deprivation. It's no secret that kids today are sleeping less than previous generations. The reason? Their screens are keeping them awake, literally. One of the main culprits is the blue light emitted by phones, tablets, and computers. Blue light interferes with the production of melatonin, a hormone that regulates sleep. This means that when kids use their phones right before bed, a practice that has become alarmingly common, they find it harder to fall asleep. Moreover, the addictive nature of social media and games keeps them up late, scrolling through feeds, chatting with friends, or playing the latest viral game. Consider the case of Emily, a 16-year-old high school student. Like many teens, she feels the pressure to stay connected with her friends through social media. She often stays up until midnight or later, scrolling through Instagram and TikTok. Even though she knows she should be getting more sleep, the fear of missing out, FOMO, keeps her glued to her screen. As a result, she wakes up exhausted every morning, struggling to focus in class, and feeling irritable throughout the day. Research has shown that sleep deprivation has serious consequences for mental health, particularly in teenagers. Lack of sleep is linked to increased anxiety, depression, and difficulty regulating emotions. When kids are sleep deprived, they're more likely to feel overwhelmed, stressed, and unable to cope with everyday challenges. This creates a vicious cycle: the more time they spend on their phones, the less they sleep, and the worse they feel. The fragmentation of attention. The second major consequence of the phone-based childhood is the fragmentation of attention. Smartphones are designed to capture and hold our attention with endless notifications, updates, and content. For kids and teens, who are still developing their ability to focus and self-regulate, this constant barrage of information can be overwhelming. Imagine a day in the life of Alex, a 14-year-old who spends most of his time online. He's doing his homework while his phone buzzes every few minutes with notifications from Snapchat, Instagram, and his favorite YouTube channel. Every time he hears the ping of his phone, he checks it, and before he knows it, 20 minutes have passed without him finishing a single math problem. His attention is constantly being pulled in different directions, making it hard for him to focus on any one task for long. This kind of attention fragmentation has become the norm for many kids today. Social media platforms, with their endless scroll and quick-hit dopamine rewards, are designed to keep users engaged for as long as possible. But this comes at a cost. Kids are losing the ability to concentrate on longer, more complex tasks, like reading a book or solving a difficult problem. Instead, their brains are being trained to expect constant stimulation and instant gratification. The rise of addiction to screens. This brings us to one of the most troubling aspects of the phone-based childhood, screen addiction. Smartphones and social media are incredibly addictive, especially for young people whose brains are still developing. These platforms are engineered to be engaging, with features like infinite scroll, notifications, likes, and comments designed to keep users hooked. Take the case of Tyler, a 13-year-old who loves playing online games. What started as a fun hobby has turned into an obsession. Tyler spends hours every day playing games, often losing track of time and forgetting to do his homework or eat dinner. When his parents try to limit his screen time, he becomes irritable and anxious. He feels a constant pull to return to his games, even when he knows it's affecting his grades and his relationships with his family. This kind of screen addiction is becoming increasingly common among young people. A study found that many teens feel unable to stop using their phones, even when they recognize that it's having negative effects on their lives. The addictive nature of these platforms is not an accident. It's the result of careful design choices made by tech companies to maximize engagement and profit. But for kids and teens, this addiction can have serious consequences, leading to decreased academic performance, strained relationships, and even mental health problems. The epidemic of loneliness. One of the most paradoxical effects of the phone-based childhood is the rise in loneliness. You would think that with all the ways to connect, social media, messaging apps, video calls, kids today would feel more connected than ever. But the opposite is true. Studies show that young people are reporting higher levels of loneliness and isolation than previous generations. Why is this happening? One reason is that social media, despite its promise of connection, often leads to shallow, superficial interactions. Kids may have hundreds of friends or followers online, but few deep, meaningful relationships. Instead of spending time with friends in person, they're communicating through screens, which can leave them feeling disconnected and alone. Take Mia, a 15-year-old who spends hours on Instagram each day. She's constantly checking her feed, liking posts, and commenting on her friends' photos. But despite all her online activity, Mia often feels lonely. She sees her friends hanging out without her, and the carefully curated images on social media make her feel like she's missing out. Even when she's with her friends in person, she notices that everyone is more focused on their phones than on each other. The more time she spends on social media, the lonelier she feels. This sense of isolation is compounded by the fact that kids are spending less time interacting with people face-to-face. Instead of hanging out with friends in the real world, they're communicating through screens, which lacks the depth and richness of in-person interactions. Over time, this can lead to feelings of loneliness and disconnection. The perils of social comparison and perfectionism. Another harmful effect of social media is the pressure it creates to constantly compare oneself to others. Platforms like Instagram and TikTok are filled with carefully curated images of people's lives, their best moments, their most flattering photos, their biggest achievements. For kids and teens, who are still figuring out their own identities, this constant exposure to idealized versions of others can be damaging. Consider the case of Jenna, a 14-year-old who spends a lot of time on Instagram. She follows influencers and celebrities who always seem to have perfect lives, beautiful clothes, flawless makeup, and exciting adventures. Jenna can't help but compare herself to them, and she often feels like she's falling short. She starts to obsess over her appearance, spending hours trying to take the perfect selfie or get more likes on her posts. Over time, this leads to feelings of inadequacy and low self-esteem. This kind of social comparison is particularly harmful to girls, who are more likely to use social media as a way to present a curated image of themselves to the world. The pressure to appear perfect can lead to anxiety, depression, and even eating disorders. Boys, meanwhile, are more likely to withdraw into virtual worlds, like gaming, where they can escape the pressures of the real world. The perfect storm: social contagion and mental health. One of the most alarming effects of the phone-based childhood is the rise of social contagion, the spread of behaviors and emotions through social networks. Social media platforms amplify this effect, allowing negative emotions like anxiety and depression to spread rapidly among young people. When teens see their friends posting about their struggles, they may start to feel the same way, even if they weren't previously experiencing those emotions. For example, if a group of friends starts talking about feeling anxious or depressed online, other members of the group may begin to feel the same way, even if they weren't previously struggling with those issues. This is known as social contagion, and it can contribute to the rising rates of mental health problems among teens. Social media also makes it easier for harmful behaviors, like self-harm or eating disorders, to spread. Online communities can form around these behaviors, creating a dangerous environment where negative behaviors are normalized and even encouraged. A path forward. The great rewiring of childhood, driven by technology, has had far-reaching consequences for kids' mental health and development. From sleep deprivation to attention fragmentation, screen addiction to loneliness, social comparison to social contagion, these forces are shaping a generation that is more anxious, more isolated, and more vulnerable than ever before. But there is hope. In the next chapter, we'll explore potential solutions, ways to reclaim childhood from the clutches of technology and restore a healthier balance. It won't be easy, but by understanding the full scope of the problem, we can begin to take steps toward a brighter future for the next generation. The journey to undo the damage starts with awareness and action. Let's look at how we can empower children to live more balanced, fulfilling lives in a world where screens are here to stay. Chapter 4: The Impact of Social Media on Girls and Boys, Diverging Paths of Harm. As we continue to explore the ways technology has reshaped childhood, we arrive at a critical topic that has gained considerable attention in recent years: the differential impact of social media on girls and boys. While both genders are affected by the phone-based childhood, the ways they experience and process this digital transformation are strikingly different. In this chapter, we'll unpack why social media tends to damage girls more severely, while boys are increasingly withdrawing from the real world into virtual environments such as gaming. These diverging paths of harm are leading to an unprecedented mental health crisis in both genders, albeit for different reasons. Girls, social media and the cult of perfectionism. For teenage girls, social media platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and Snapchat can be both a blessing and a curse. On the one hand, these platforms allow girls to connect with friends, express themselves, and engage with content that reflects their interests. On the other hand, they expose girls to a constant stream of curated images and idealized lives, fostering a toxic environment of social comparison and unrealistic standards of beauty and success. The social comparison trap. Imagine the daily experience of a 15-year-old girl named Sarah. She logs onto Instagram and is immediately bombarded with pictures of her friends at a party she wasn't invited to, influencers with flawless skin and perfect bodies, and celebrities living glamorous lives that seem worlds apart from her own. She can't help but compare herself to these images, feeling inadequate and like she's missing out. This feeling is so common among teenage girls that researchers have given it a name: social comparison. Social media encourages girls to measure their self-worth based on how they look, how many likes or comments they receive, and how closely they resemble the images of perfection they see online. This constant pressure to meet unattainable beauty standards leads to a spike in issues related to body image, self-esteem, and anxiety. Studies show that girls are particularly vulnerable to developing eating disorders and body dysmorphia as a result of social media exposure. The emphasis on appearance, combined with the relentless feedback loop of likes and comments, creates an environment where girls feel judged and scrutinized every time they post. The rise of anxiety and depression in girls. One of the most alarming trends of the past decade is the sharp rise in anxiety and depression among teenage girls. Researchers have found that girls who spend more time on social media are more likely to experience symptoms of anxiety, depression, and loneliness. But why are girls more affected than boys? The answer lies in the way girls use social media. Girls tend to use these platforms for social interaction and self-presentation, which makes them more susceptible to the pressures of online validation. The need to appear perfect online, combined with the fear of missing out, FOMO, creates a toxic cycle of anxiety. Girls are constantly worried about how they're being perceived, and the ever-present possibility of cyberbullying adds another layer of stress. Take the story of Emma, a 14-year-old girl who regularly posts selfies on Instagram. She spends hours editing her photos, trying to look her best. When her posts don't get as many likes as she hoped, she feels crushed. She starts to obsess over every detail, her hair, her skin, her weight, and begins to feel like she'll never be good enough. Over time, this leads to a downward spiral of anxiety and depression. Cyberbullying and the amplification of social anxiety. Another reason girls are more vulnerable to the negative effects of social media is the prevalence of cyberbullying. While boys experience bullying in more physical or direct forms, girls are more likely to experience relational aggression, bullying that takes place through exclusion, rumors, and emotional manipulation. Social media amplifies these behaviors, making it easier for bullies to spread rumors, share hurtful comments, or exclude someone from online groups. Consider the case of Lily, a 16-year-old girl who becomes the target of a group chat where her so-called friends spread cruel rumors about her. Every time she opens her phone, she's hit with a new wave of hurtful messages. Even though the bullying is happening online, it feels just as real, and sometimes more damaging, than face-to-face harassment. The anonymity and distance provided by social media can make bullies bolder and more ruthless, while the victims have no escape from the constant harassment. This relentless pressure to perform, combined with the ever-present threat of cyberbullying, takes a significant toll on girls' mental health. It's no wonder that the rates of anxiety, depression, and even self-harm have skyrocketed among teenage girls in the age of social media. Boys, escaping into the virtual world. While girls are more likely to suffer from social media's pressure to appear perfect, boys are dealing with a different, but equally concerning, set of challenges. For many boys, the real world has become a place of frustration, stress, and disconnection. As a result, more and more boys are retreating into virtual worlds, such as online gaming, where they can escape the pressures of reality and experience a sense of control and achievement that may be lacking in their offline lives. The appeal of gaming. Let's meet Jack, a 17-year-old high school student who has become increasingly withdrawn from his family and friends. He spends most of his free time playing video games like Fortnite and Call of Duty with his online friends. In these virtual environments, Jack feels powerful and in control. He can achieve goals, rank up, and earn the admiration of his peers in a way that he doesn't experience in real life. For many boys like Jack, online gaming offers an escape from the challenges of adolescence. In the real world, boys may struggle with academic pressure, social awkwardness, or feelings of inadequacy. But in the virtual world, they can be anyone they want to be. Gaming provides a sense of accomplishment, mastery, and community that is often missing in their offline lives. The consequences of digital withdrawal. While gaming can provide a temporary escape, it can also lead to long-term consequences. Boys who spend excessive time in virtual worlds often withdraw from real-world relationships and responsibilities. They may become more isolated, spending less time with friends and family, and more time glued to their screens. This digital withdrawal can lead to a decrease in social skills, making it harder for boys to connect with others in face-to-face interactions. Consider Jake, a 16-year-old who has started skipping school and ignoring his homework to play video games late into the night. His grades are slipping, and his parents are worried about his future. But for Jake, the virtual world feels more rewarding than the real one. He's become so immersed in gaming that he's lost interest in activities he used to enjoy, like playing sports or hanging out with his friends. The problem is that while gaming provides a temporary sense of fulfillment, it doesn't address the underlying issues that boys are facing. Instead of developing the skills they need to navigate the real world, such as resilience, problem-solving, and social interaction, boys are escaping into a digital world where those skills aren't required. The mental health toll on boys. The rise of gaming addiction among boys is linked to a range of mental health issues, including depression, anxiety, and social isolation. Boys who spend excessive time gaming are more likely to experience difficulties in school, struggle with interpersonal relationships, and suffer from low self-esteem. In extreme cases, gaming addiction can even lead to physical health problems, such as obesity and sleep deprivation. One of the most concerning trends is the way boys are using gaming as a way to cope with stress, loneliness, and feelings of inadequacy. Instead of developing healthy coping mechanisms, they turn to gaming as a form of escape. Over time, this can lead to a vicious cycle. The more time boys spend gaming, the more disconnected they feel from the real world, and the harder it becomes for them to re-engage with it. Diverging paths, common outcomes. While girls and boys experience the digital world in different ways, the outcomes are often alarmingly similar: rising rates of anxiety, depression, and social isolation. Girls are more likely to suffer from social comparison, perfectionism, and cyberbullying, while boys are more prone to digital withdrawal and gaming addiction. But both genders are being shaped by the same forces: the overwhelming influence of technology and the erosion of real-world interactions. Moving forward, the impact of social media on girls and boys is a clear warning sign that the phone-based childhood is not sustainable. If we want to safeguard the mental health and well-being of the next generation, we need to address the root causes of this crisis. In the next chapter, we'll explore potential solutions, steps that parents, teachers, schools, and tech companies can take to mitigate the harmful effects of technology and help kids reconnect with the real world. There is no simple fix, but by understanding the distinct challenges that boys and girls face in the digital age, we can begin to create a healthier, more balanced environment for all children to thrive. Chapter 5: Collective Action Problems: Why We're Stuck and How We Can Break Free. In the previous chapters, we've explored the ways in which the digital age has reshaped childhood and adolescence, leading to alarming increases in mental health issues, particularly among Gen Z. We've delved into how social media affects girls and boys differently, the rise of gaming addiction among boys, and the toxic pressures of social comparison for girls. But now, we arrive at a pivotal question: why aren't we doing more to fix this? This chapter is about the societal obstacles, what social psychologist Jonathan Haidt calls collective action problems, that keep us stuck in harmful patterns, even when we know they're damaging our children. These problems involve complex, intertwined forces at play, from economic incentives for tech companies to parental fears and cultural shifts. However, just as we can identify what traps us, we can also find a way out. The collective action problem explained. A collective action problem arises when individual decisions lead to a situation that's harmful to the group as a whole. Each person may make rational choices for themselves, but when everyone does this, it creates a situation where no one benefits. A classic example is the tragedy of the commons. When everyone overuses a shared resource, such as a pasture, it becomes depleted for everyone. In the case of technology and childhood, collective action problems manifest in several ways. Parents, schools, and even governments may want to limit screen time, protect children's mental health, or encourage more in-person social interaction, but find themselves unable to make meaningful changes on their own. Without coordinated action, it feels impossible to fight the tide of technology that has permeated every aspect of life. Example: the parent's dilemma. Imagine being a parent of a 12-year-old girl, Claire, who comes home every day asking for a smartphone because all her friends have one. You, as a parent, know the risks. You've read the articles and studies about the negative effects of social media on young girls, the anxiety, the social comparison, the sleep deprivation. But you also know that if you say no to the phone, Claire might be left out, excluded from her peer group, or bullied for not being in the loop. In this scenario, it feels like you're caught in a no-win situation. If you give her the phone, you're exposing her to a world that could harm her mental health. But if you don't, she might suffer socially, which can also lead to feelings of loneliness and anxiety. What's a parent to do? This dilemma is a perfect example of a collective action problem. Every parent faces the same pressures and fears, and many end up giving in to the demand for phones and social media access. But when everyone makes this choice, we end up with a generation of kids whose lives are dominated by screens. Example: the school's dilemma. Now, consider the challenge faced by schools. Educators are increasingly aware that excessive screen time, especially during school hours, can lead to distracted students and lower academic performance. But enforcing strict rules about phones in school can be an uphill battle. Parents might push back, arguing that their kids need phones for safety reasons, or students might resist, claiming they need access to digital tools for learning. Schools may want to restrict phone use or limit social media exposure, but unless every school does the same, they risk being the outlier. This creates a situation where schools feel powerless to make meaningful change, because they fear backlash or non-compliance from parents and students. Again, we see how individual choices contribute to a larger, unsustainable system. Tech companies and the profit motive. While parents and schools are trapped in their own collective action problems, tech companies are playing a different game altogether. The major players in social media, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, are driven by profit motives. Their business models rely on user engagement, which means they have a vested interest in keeping people, especially young people, hooked on their platforms for as long as possible. The more time users spend on these platforms, the more ads they see, and the more data the companies collect. This creates powerful financial incentives for tech companies to design their platforms in ways that maximize attention and addiction, even if it's at the expense of mental health. Take the example of the infinite scroll feature, which allows users to endlessly browse through content without ever having to pause or make a conscious choice to stop. This feature, which is now ubiquitous on social media platforms, is a prime example of how tech companies design their products to keep users engaged for longer periods of time. For a parent or a school, pushing back against these massive corporations can feel like trying to stop a tidal wave with a bucket. But as Haidt argues, this is where collective action can make a difference. Breaking free, 4 simple rules. So, how do we break free from this collective action trap? Haidt proposes 4 simple, yet powerful, rules that could help us begin to reverse the damage and restore a healthier balance for children. 1. Delay the smartphone until 8th grade. The first rule is directed at parents: don't give your child a smartphone until they're at least in 8th grade. The earlier kids get smartphones, the more vulnerable they are to the negative effects of social media and screen addiction. By waiting until they're older, you give them more time to develop the social and emotional skills they need to navigate the online world. A group of parents could form a phone-free pact, agreeing to delay giving their kids smartphones until 8th grade, ensuring that no one's child feels left out. This collective decision can protect kids from the harms of premature smartphone use, while also fostering in-person social interactions. 2. Limit screen time during the week. Haidt's second rule is to set strict limits on screen time during the school week. This rule applies not just to social media, but to any non-essential screen use. By cutting down on screens, kids can focus more on their schoolwork, hobbies, and real-world relationships. The goal is to reintroduce balance and help kids reconnect with offline activities, which are crucial for healthy development. A practical way to implement this is to establish screen-free zones or times in the household, like during meals or before bedtime. Research shows that cutting down on screen time before bed can improve sleep quality, which in turn positively impacts mental health. 3. Encourage play and independent exploration. The third rule encourages parents and educators to create more opportunities for unstructured play and independent exploration. Kids need time to engage in physical activities, explore the world around them, and learn how to navigate social situations without the constant supervision or mediation of technology. Communities could work together to create play streets, where kids can safely play outside without the fear of traffic or other dangers. Schools could integrate more recess time or after-school programs focused on outdoor activities. 4. Push for tech reforms. Finally, Haidt calls on all of us, parents, educators, policymakers, and tech users, to push for meaningful reforms in the tech industry. This could include advocating for stricter age limits on social media, demanding transparency about how algorithms work, or supporting laws that regulate the amount of personal data companies can collect from minors. If tech companies face pressure from governments, users, and investors to prioritize children's well-being, they may be incentivized to make their platforms safer and less addictive. A call to action. The solutions Haidt proposes aren't just about limiting technology, they're about reclaiming a childhood that allows kids to develop the resilience, creativity, and social skills they need to thrive in the real world. It's about finding balance in a world where technology is ever-present but doesn't have to dominate every aspect of life. Collective action is the only way to solve the problems created by the phone-based childhood. By working together, parents, schools, communities, and governments, we can begin to reverse the mental health crisis facing Gen Z. We may not be able to undo all the damage, but by taking small, coordinated steps, we can give the next generation the chance to grow up healthier, happier, and more connected to the world around them. The stakes are high, and the time to act is now. They spend on a platform. Reclaiming childhood, a collective effort. The path forward requires all of us, parents, educators, policymakers, and tech companies, to work together. Haidt's vision isn't about rejecting technology entirely, but about finding a way to integrate it into our lives without allowing it to dominate. It's about restoring balance, fostering resilience, and giving children the freedom to explore the world in ways that don't involve a screen. Haidt concludes the book by reminding us that the future of childhood is not set in stone. We have the power to make changes that will benefit not only our children, but society as a whole. The challenge is great, but so too is our capacity for collective action. By taking the lessons from this book and applying them in our homes, schools, and communities, we can build a future where children grow up healthier, happier, and more connected to the people around them, not just the devices in their hands. A final word of hope. Despite the sobering statistics and challenges laid out in the earlier chapters, Haidt's final message is one of hope. Change is possible. Many parents, educators, and communities are already finding creative solutions to the problems posed by the digital age. We can all contribute to this movement by making small, deliberate choices in our daily lives. In doing so, we can reclaim a more humane, balanced, and joyful childhood for the next generation. The choice is ours, and the time to act is now.